So whenever you're looking at an 8K printer, you'll normally see that they get paired up with their 8K resin as well, and that tends to be the recommendation that you should print in that 8K resin to get the full quality. So in this video, that's what I'm going to be testing out. I'll be using my standard ABS-like resin and comparing it to an 8K resin just to see whether or not that is true, and you should be going for that 8K resin to get that full quality. Now, to help with this comparison, Phrozen very kindly sent over the Sonic Mini 8K, which is a really detailed printer for anybody who's looking for any miniatures out there. They did send me this free of charge. They didn't stipulate that I had to say anything nice about the machine either, so that's always a bonus. But let's get on with the video and see how well that standard resin compares to like an 8K resin on an 8K machine. The reason I was excited to do this video is because the Phrozen Sonic Mini 8K gives a really dense amount of pixels. So it's on a smaller build plate than something like my Elegoo Saturn II that I've used in the past. So although both are 8K, the Phrozen has a smaller build plate, so everything is more focused. Ultimately, it all comes down to that like pixels per inch. If you've got a larger screen, it's spread out across a much larger surface, so it then becomes less dense. But then if you've got something that's on a smaller screen, everything is focused and really sharp. So I figured in this video, hopefully, we might be able to see if there really is a detail between the 8K resin versus just standard resin. This machine should show it up. So I used the same brand of resin, so I used Elegoo's ABS-like resin, which is my go-to resin for pretty much anything I do when it comes to wargaming miniatures. It's durable enough and gives a good amount of quality as well. And then I also used the Elegoo 8K resin. Now, unfortunately, they don't do an ABS-like version of this, so there's no direct comparison, but they're like their two flagship types of resin. After getting my files sliced up, I poured my resin and got to printing. With both the ABS resin and the 8K resin, the Phrozen Sonic Mini 8K is actually really easy to work with, provided you get all of your settings dialed in. I did have to bump up my exposure just a little bit from the recommended settings on Lychee, but once I did, both resins printed nice and easy. The first thing I did is I printed off a batch on the ABS-like resin. So I printed off these Ladies of Chaos, which was a Kickstarter that I backed quite recently, because they're a slightly larger print, so they're 75mm, very detailed. There's a lot there for us to pick out and just unpack and like compare to something on the 8K. I then printed off all of these D&D miniatures that have been sent over to me as well, and I have those linked below for you to check out. And again, these are really detailed. There's a lot of characteristics on there, especially on like this turtle, for example, or like the scales and the bits of his shell and all of his flesh. Looks really detailed. So I thought that'd be a lot of fun to do a direct comparison. So I printed off all the ABS-like resin stuff first, and straight away the thing that I noticed was these are just damned good quality. And that's the problem that we're probably going to face, is that coming off, these look fantastic. Like, it's really hard to see any areas where there's a need for improvement. I guess that's a testament to the printers that we've got at the moment now. The consumer printers you can buy are already doing amazing things. So I suppose maybe we're going to up our game by using an 8K resin, but I'm having my doubts at this moment. So once they were printed off, I then printed off some of the stuff in the 8K resin as well. And coming off the printer, I was kind of shocked. I felt that they were better quality. But the problem here is that the ABS-like resin is a light grey, and the Elegoo 8K resin is a dark grey. And straight away, I don't know what it is. I think it's just that we've been brainwashed by Games Workshop that they all come in this like dark grey plastic, and that's just what your mind's used to seeing. So the 8K stuff looked straight away like it was more like something I'd bought from Games Workshop, and I don't know if that was just a weird psychological thing where I was thinking, well, they look like Games Workshop prints because they're dark grey. But the bigger issue is the fact that they just seem to have more contrast, so it's easier to pick out the details straight off the printer. Because they're a darker grey, they seem to show more detail, so I needed to prime them. So to make it fair, I had to prime them and stick them in there. However, at this stage, both of these resins look fantastic, but the 8K, just straight off the printer, was looking a little bit sharper. So the one thing I did notice is I was getting some layer lines on there, so I did play around with the settings in Lychee. Now these have all been printed off at 0.05mm layer height, and on something like the Sonic Mini, we can go even lower. I think we can go to like 0.01 layer height, which is kind of mind-boggling, but to keep it fair, they're both going to be printed off at the 0.05mm layer height. So when it came to printing off the Ladies of Chaos, I printed both of them in the ABS-like resin and the 8K resin, but I messed around with some of the anti-aliasing, and I put it on the lowest setting, and that really gave an incredibly smooth result at the end of it. So with all of those washed, cured, and cleaned, and all of that stuff, I grabbed my airbrush, and I hit them all with black first and did the Zenithal Prime with white ink over the top. And when it got to this stage, I realized I was really struggling to find any difference between them. The thing that really struck me was the quality was top notch on both of them, on just your standard resin and on your 8K resin. With the naked eye, you can see a difference. Like if it's there in front of you and you've got both minis, I think with just a blind test, not letting somebody know what they are beforehand, most people will pick out the sharper stuff on the 8K resin. Things like this turtle, for example, you can see more detail like on his underarms, on his shell. He's got these leaves, these like, I don't know, this kind of seaweed stuff going over the back of his shell, and you can capture some more of that detail. It's definitely a little bit more noticeable. It's harder to pick up on the camera, like a lot harder to pick up, and I don't know if that's just because the camera's gonna struggle to get that much detail, but also because my white for the Zenithal Prime is a little bit sharper, so it throws some of that kind of contrast off, and the camera's doing its weird wacky technology things in the background to substitute for that. On things like these, this kind of lady with a massive mace, for example, again, it's not that noticeable until you get to behind her, and she's got these, I don't know what they are, she's got this weird ring around her head and these bits hanging off of her. And you can just about see a little bit more detail in the bits that are hanging off her in the 8K resin. Also around like the midriff as well, she's got this almost like skeletal bit, and it's a little bit less defined on the standard resin than it is on something like the 8K resin. There are more details, ever so slightly, when it's in front of you and you're looking at them side by side on the 8K resin. So it does make a difference. It's a tiny bit of difference, but it does make a difference. The other thing that I should mention, because it'd be just stupid of me not to, if you are printing off miniatures like I do, the ABS light resin is more durable. There's just no argument there. The 8K resin gives obviously that slight bit more detail, but it's not as durable. So if I were to drop this, for example, it's more likely to break. So which one? There we go. So that's my 8K resin one. There is enough flex in there that actually you can play with both of these on the tabletop. But if you have more clumsy players, and you're more clumsy yourself like I am, I knock things over all the time when I dry brush quite aggressively, there is more chance that you will break something like the 8K resin one. So on the Ladies of Chaos, it became harder to see. And I don't know if that's just because they're bigger. So these are 75mm versus your standard 32mm ones that I'm just comparing. So on her, for example, with this sword, and she's looking longingly into this mirror at the top of the sword, this is a fantastic sculpt. And the reason I chose this is because on the back, and I guess on the front, she's got this like shawl over her and this dress. And the detail on this is just incredible. The fact that a printer can print that, it still boggles my mind at what it can do. But this has a lot of detail. However, looking at these side by side, even in person, obviously camera aside and everything, I don't think you can see any difference at all on the camera when it comes to these, by the way. So if you're looking for that, you might be able to spot it. Let me know in the comments. But I couldn't when I was going back through and just looking at the footage I captured. The only areas I can see any discernible difference between these are on these boots. So like at the top of the boots, she has this like lace up bit, and there's this hem that kind of goes down the side of the boot as well. I can just about see a difference there. It's a little bit more defined on the 8K resin one. Apart from that, these look almost identical. And the other thing to note as well is that the layer lines are basically gone. You'd have to look really, really close to see these. And one of the great things about priming them and putting a bit of paint on there is you start to see some of those layer lines. You start to see something like contrast between the dark prime underneath it and then the lighter ink that I put over the top. And because I use a white ink for the top of my Zenithal, it normally picks out those layer lines quite a lot, so you do start to see them. And on this, you basically can't see the layer lines. It's incredible. Like that, the print quality of this is amazing. But like I said, at the larger scale, I don't see as much between them. It's really hard to pick it out. There's a slight bit of difference, but not a massive amount. So to sum up, if you're going to buy an 8K printer, so something like the Sonic Mini 8K, is it worthwhile picking up some 8K resin? Honestly, it's really hard to say, and it all comes down to your preference. When I reviewed a previous 8K resin, I guess my conclusion was that if you're printing something larger, like a statue type thing, it's worthwhile going for because you don't need the additional durability offered to you by something like an ABS-like resin. So that way you're getting pretty much all of the pros because you're getting that increased detail, that defined detail, and everything there without any of the cons of it being more fragile, because obviously this is a big beastie. It's probably not going to break. However, if you're going to be doing things like wargaming, and these are going to be actual game pieces and stuff that's going to get thrown around, then something like your standard ABS-like resin probably is better, because even though there is a slight bit of difference, it's probably not worth the trade-off. And like I said at the start, this is more a testament to the machines and where we're at the moment. They just give incredible detail regardless of the resin that you're using. But if you do want to step up in terms of quality, then the 8K resin does make a little bit of difference. The other thing as well, if you're printing off things that you want to do to maybe put into a competition and you really want to pick out every last little bit of detail, then that's where something like that 8K resin is going to shine, because there's a slight bit of difference there. There's more detail you can pick out, there's more definition you're going to get from that model. So yeah, it all comes down to who you are. But at the end of the day, I guess the conclusion is that if you've got an 8K printer, you can't go wrong pretty much regardless if you use 8K resin or your standard resin. So let me know your thoughts. Did you spot any differences that blind old me didn't spot through that? Both sets of resin gave me some incredible print, and it was really hard to see the difference. Like I said, in person, you can see a difference, but you have to search for it. If you handed me the standard ABS-like resin print and showed me that, I would be blown away regardless. If you then showed me the 8K resin one afterwards, and it wasn't side by side, I probably wouldn't notice a difference. Side by side, in person, there is a slight bit of difference. On camera, it's going to be harder to capture, so yeah, let's leave it there. So thank you very much for watching this video. Hope you've enjoyed that, and thank you very much to Phrozen as well for sending this printer over. It gives some incredible results ultimately at this scale, regardless of the resin you're using. So thank you very much for sending that over so I could do this project. If you've got any questions about the different types of resin, about this printer as well, throw them down in the comments below. I'll see you for the next one. Bye.